he could not keep a thought straight. He would go in one direction and then he'd go in another direction, and that there wasn't really necessarily a through line to the way he spoke or what even he was talking about.
Convicted felon Donald Trump just received a devastating blow from a pro-Trump news source when they revealed that multiple Trump-friendly CEOs recently met with the former president and then walked away with concerns and questions about his mental fitness. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I have several clips to show you in this video, but as a reminder, according to polls, Americans have questions about the mental fitness of both President Biden and Donald Trump. But the frustrating part is that the mainstream media, and of course right-wing media, tend to hyperfixate on President Biden and his gaffes, and then they tend to grade Donald Trump on a curve. And it's irrational, especially when there are so many former top Trump officials who have also questioned his mental fitness, and some pockets of right-wing media. And now we're finding out actual business leaders who have met with the guy recently. I'm going to play these clips, and as a reminder, this comes from the pro-Trump CNBC news outlet. This is what they have to say.
I will say I was surprised. I spoke to a number of CEOs who I would say walked into the meeting being Trump supporter-ish or thinking that they might be leaning that direction, who said that he was remarkably meandering, could not keep a straight thought, was all over the map. And that they, which maybe not surprising, but was interesting to me because these were people who I think might have been actually predisposed to him and actually walked out of the room less predisposed to him, actually predisposed to thinking this is not necessarily, as one person said, this may not be any different or better than a Biden thought if you're thinking that way.
Ouch. That is devastating for Trump, especially right now when you consider that MAGA is trying to do a full court press because they do have a polling advantage with respect to mental fitness, even though, again, a majority of Americans in poll after poll after poll question the mental fitness of both. And right now, MAGA is trying to make it as much of an issue as possible. And now you get this devastating news from a pro-Trump news source about Trump-friendly business CEOs who are already inclined to vote for the guy because he wants to cut taxes for the rich and corporations. Devastating. And again, the CNBC host in question expounds further during a conversation with MSNBC.
One said to me, he could not keep a thought straight. He would go in one direction and then he'd go in another direction, and that there wasn't really necessarily a through line to the way he spoke or what even he was talking about. At one point, and you described it earlier, he discussed his plans to bring the tax rate down from the corporate tax rate down from 21% to 20%. And apparently at some point in the meeting was asked about why he had chosen 20%. And he said, well, it's a round number. And I think that unto itself had a number of CEOs shaking their head, given that 1% of the total tax burden on the country is actually a huge number in terms of what is needed to support the revenue for this country. So while I do think that there are policies and major policy differences between President Biden and the former President Trump, and that many in the business community think ultimately that some of the policies that President Trump would enact may very well be better, at least for business, than the ones that President Biden has on offer. I think there was a concern about whether we were going to see a similar movie to the last presidency.
Again, this is absolutely devastating, which, by the way, you know, President Biden and the Democrats should be running wild with this because it's a much more honest conversation, and it's politically expedient to try to close that gap in perception. And again, I want to point out that this isn't like an isolated event. As a matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal, you know, which is a right-wing tabloid, I mean, they're owned by News Corp, they're a cousin of Fox News. They recently ran this editorial which dominated headlines, and the headline was like, Biden is slipping. But even this right-wing outlet was sure to include the fact that there are questions about Donald Trump's mental fitness. So I'm going to quote there. Former President Donald Trump, who is 77, he's now 78 as of today, is 3.5 years younger than Biden, also has faced questions about his mental acuity. Indeed, both candidates have been captured repeatedly on camera, slipping up on facts or otherwise botching their public remarks, providing a steady stream of fodder for both Democrats and Republicans to attack the mental capacity of the opposing candidate. They also say at the bottom, Trump, for his part, mixed up Nikki Haley, a Republican presidential primary opponent, and House Speaker Emeritus Representative Nancy Pelosi, the California Democrat, during a January speech about January 6th, by the way. That was what it was about. At a rally in Virginia in March, he referred to Biden as Barack Obama when commenting on Russian leader Vladimir Putin's opinion of U.S. leadership. During his criminal trial in New York in May, he closed his eyes for extended periods. He reportedly fell asleep multiple times. They go on to say, after the January 6th insurrection on the Capitol, there was so much concern over Trump's mental state that some of his cabinet officials discussed whether there should be a greater check on his power, and at least one considered invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. We have seen nor heard nothing like that from the Biden administration. Okay, so again, this is one of those things when you look at the substance beyond just gut checks and vibes about the candidates, right? If you actually look at the substance, there's so much more that is questionable about Trump than Biden. As a matter of fact, 40 out of 44 top Trump officials, including cabinet officials, have refused to endorse Trump for re-election. That is unheard of. That is insane. We've never seen anything like that. In contrast, President Biden's cabinet, all of them are endorsing him, including former cabinet officials. I mean, we just don't see anything like this. This is Alyssa Farah Griffin, a former Trump communications official. This is what she had to say.
But I think that if you're going to be critical of Joe Biden, you have to look at the glaring warning signs about Donald Trump. Listening to him now does not sound like him in 2016. Right. And he was not ever particularly eloquent. 2016, it's not like he was William Shakespeare
really
by
nice
any means.
That was said nicely.
But it is there. I'm recognizing and seeing a decline in him. Others who've known him have said it. And I think that matters because, I mean, from comparing Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley to confusing the president of Turkey with the president of Hungary, to confusing Obama and Biden left and right. He does this constantly. He's not where he once was. And yeah, exactly. It's the looks. I'm convinced that the stress of having lost the 2020 election, the legal, the convictions, the indictments, all just piling up, and him finally maybe being held accountable. 34 convictions, felony.
And they go on like that. But again, that is somebody who knew Trump. This isn't somebody who simply voted for Trump. This is somebody who knew the man in a personal, professional, political basis. That's an informed opinion. It's like when Anthony Scaramucci, another former communications official in the Trump administration, I mean, he said it best. He's like, there are 40 of us who won't endorse the guy, and we know him better than you. We know him better than the people who support him. And he said it would be like, again, 40 executives of a pharmaceutical company writing a letter saying, don't take this drug that our company manufactured. He's right. Nobody would take it. He's like, if we were 40 executives of an automotive company, right? And we said, do not buy this car that our company created, it will kill you. You wouldn't buy it. And yet, when you have 40 people who refuse to endorse Trump for re-election or have explicitly said that he's not fit for office because he's corrupt, he's criminal, he's stupid, he's mentally unwell, he's uncurious, he's deficient in so many ways, so many millions of Americans refuse to take it seriously. And again, the example I use is imagine you're hiring somebody, right? It's your job. You're in HR, you're a small business owner, whatever. You have to hire somebody for a job. And you get their resume and you refer to previous contacts, previous employers, and the people who worked with them and for them, the people who are most proximate, say, do not hire this person. None of you watching who are Trump curious would hire somebody in that situation. And that's exactly what is the case here. And irrational MAGA cultists are not taking it seriously at all. Very weird stuff. Now, CBS just published an analysis, poll analysis. Do Trump and Biden have the mental and cognitive health to serve as president? A quarter of the nation's voters think neither President Biden nor Donald Trump has the mental and cognitive health to serve as president. While partisanship plays a role in these perceptions, that's led to what may be a tough trade-off for some voters, with many independents voting for someone, whether Mr. Biden or Trump, who they don't think has the cognitive ability to serve. They concede Trump fares relatively better than Biden in perception of cognitive ability, though neither is drawing wide confidence. Only about a third of voters think that Biden has the cognitive ability. Half of voters think Trump does. Okay. And again, this is based on one poll, the YouGov poll, right? Which is very reputable. We talked in previous polls, other polls, New York Times, Siena, Marist, so many of them, where majorities question the cognitive faculties of both candidates. And you got to consider, like, in some ways, if I were on the Biden campaign, I don't know if I would be relieved, but to me, it'd be like, okay, the fact that a majority of Americans consistently think that Donald Trump also lacks the ability to run for office or to hold office, despite the hyperfixation on Biden, that is a serious vulnerability, right? Think about it. Given all the focus and attention on Biden, and Donald Trump is still suffering in the polls with respect to cognitive ability, he's graded on a damn curve, and we don't see him nearly as often because he's not the president. This is what I mean, where I believe that you and I and Democrats should be relentlessly pursuing this, a full court press. And this story in particular, hearing these CEOs, with people like include Apple's Tim Cook, JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, these people who are predisposed to support Trump, walking away with serious questions about his mental capacity. MSNBC, CNN, all the places that aren't Fox, because of course Fox will never acknowledge this. They will bury it. But the rest of us, we should be trumpeting it. We should be saying, hey, listen, if we're going to talk about the mental faculties of the candidates, fine, because it's important. But we're not going to ignore Trump. We're not going to grade Trump on a curve. We're going to grade them by the same damn standard. And if one comes out better than the other, so be it. But we're not going to give Trump a boost. We're not going to ignore things for Trump. Again, we're not going to grade him on a curve. And some have said, Don Lemon, who I've interviewed, he's mentioned this before. Others have said as well that, the thing is, we have to create an equivalence because Donald Trump is uniquely criminal, right? He's faced, he's been between the 34 criminal convictions, and I think it was like a total of 80 something, allegations, indictments. President Biden doesn't have that issue, right? So I've heard some people say, of course they're going to focus on President Biden's age because that's all you can hold against him. Donald Trump is a criminal. Well, as Pod Save America said, it's not a choice between old and crazy. It's a choice between old and crazy. Again, we have to stop. We have to kill the instinct. We really do, to create false equivalences. Like, I'm complaining about this about a person, and I need to be fair, so I'll just complain about that about a different person, and we'll just have a one-to-one. No, Donald Trump has also raised serious questions about his mental fitness, and there's no reason to grade him on a curve just because he also has additional baggage in the form of his criminal conduct. It is completely irrational, and it's bad faith, and you and I have to play a role in stopping it. As a matter of fact, the other thing I want to point out here real quick is that it was recently reported by right-wing outlets like the New York Post, President Biden appeared to wander off at the G7 summit in Italy, with officials needing to pull him back in. Just want to show you this real quick. So you see that? That kind of looks bad, doesn't it? The president wandering off and giving no one thumbs up. Well, folks, it turns out they edited the footage. It got community noted. The video has been cropped. It turns out that the president and others were acknowledging one of the other parachuters. See, there were multiple people he was giving the thumbs up to. You had Canada's Justin Trudeau, you had France's Emmanuel Macron also turning and acknowledging those other people too. Biden was just the one who walked over more closely and gave them the thumbs up. But the New York Post and these right-wing media outlets are trying to insinuate something else. And again, look at it. So MSNBC points out right-wing media shares clip of Biden without context. Fox News says, or the Fox Propaganda Network says, Biden walks off during G7 skydiving demonstration. And they've been roasted for it. Andrew Bates, who's a White House spokesperson, says this is funny for multiple reasons. Number one, even Twitter fact-checked it. Number two, it's an acknowledgement that right-wing propaganda can't criticize the president's effective leadership at a successful meeting. Number three, Rupert Murdoch remains jealous of a younger man running a more complex operation. And you've just seen going back and forth Politico and PolitiFact. They've all fact-checked it as well. But that's what they're doing. They are, as the election draws nearer, the Republican Party and their Republican sympathizing right-wing media apparatus are they're seeing this as perhaps the president's biggest vulnerability because, the sentiments about the economy and everything, all that can change. Biden's age is fixed, right? He's only going to get older. And so it seems like they are relentlessly pursuing this narrative that he's mentally unfit for office. Well, I think we Democrats and those of us who oppose Donald Trump, given that he's given us so much ammunition, metaphorically speaking, we also need to be pursuing that. Because again, it's not a choice between old versus crazy. It's a choice between old Biden versus old and crazy, which is Trump. And we talked about this before. If you look at a substantive analysis of these men, if you look at their ability to execute, their ability to legislate, because again, they're both old, they're both gaffe machines, and polls say that, majority of Americans have concerns about their mental fitness. So then you have to dig deeper. And if you dig deeper, I'm sorry, but Biden is objectively better. He's accomplished more of his agenda. As we've discussed, even if you disagree with his agenda, even if you hate his agenda, accomplishing more of your goals is a sign of competence, is a sign of greater competence than somebody who accomplishes fewer goals, especially under similar circumstances. And you also look, the Democratic Party is united behind President Biden, whereas you have top Republican officials and former Trump advisors and cabinet officials, people who know Trump better than the people sucking up to him, saying, yeah, this guy's mentally unfit for office. So Biden wins on substance. It's just a question of, can you and I and others like us, can Democratic politicians and surrogates make the case that the media needs to scrutinize Trump more fairly, which means more often? I think we should try. Let me know what you think in the comments.